and see if I can do something here.
Okay. Well, we did get in touch with some board members. A few cannot make it, and Cha Vang is is going to be able to join, but a little bit late. So I think we'll get started since we do have the first couple of minutes to do introductions. And we can then skip over the approval of the minutes until we have a quorum. We need 4 for a quorum for this meeting. So hopefully Cha will be able to join soon. For members of the public, those who can't see me, my name is Allison Elgard. I'm a Deputy Attorney General, Civil Rights Enforcement Section of the Attorney General's Office. Welcome to our Civilian Complaints Subcommittee meeting. One point of order, we do not currently have a co-chair for this meeting, so I will help facilitate it because Angela Sierra was our co-chair and she has resigned the board as the AG's appointee because she is going to, as she mentioned, work on this consumer protection commission. And so we weren't able to notice this before, we noticed this before we found out about the date, official date of Angela's resignation. So we will plan for our next subcommittee meeting to have co-chair elections. So if any of you, you can think about it and let us know if you are interested in serving as co-chair and nominating someone else on the subcommittee. I know you're all still meeting each other, or nominating yourself to be co-chair. And so we'll have that election for co-chair at our next meeting. And first, I know some of you have been introducing yourselves, but for members of the public and those who are joining, why don't we go around and do introductions, especially because we have some new board members and some returning board members. So Pastor Kennedy, would you like to begin and just introduce yourself to the public and the rest of the board?
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Kennedy. I serve at Mount Zion Church of Ontario. I've served there about 22 years. And I also am a professor at Gateway Seminary. And I enjoy serving in our community.
Thank you. Chief Swing.
Good afternoon to my colleagues on the board and to members of the public. My name is David Swing. I'm the police chief of the city of Pleasanton and the representative for the California Police Chiefs on the RIPA board, and I'm currently serving as the co-chair for this year.
And Andrea.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Guerrero. I'm the executive director at Alliance San Diego. I previously served on the RIPA board, was termed out, and was lucky enough to be reappointed, so here I am again. You're not rid of me yet, David Swing.
Welcome back, Andrea.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
We're very excited to have you back on the board. So thank you. Great. I don't think any other board members have joined us yet. So I think we will, why don't we skip over approval of the minutes until we have a quorum, hopefully, once Cha is able to join, and once she is able to join, we can also have her introduce herself to everybody. So why don't we turn next to the update by the Department of Justice. So I will turn it over to Dominique.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dominique Alcaraz. I am one of the attorneys in the Civil Rights Enforcement section here at DOJ. Welcome to Pastor Kennedy, and nice to see you again, David Swing, and welcome back, Andrea. We are happy to have you. I hope that hopefully Cha can join us shortly, since the plan here is to sort of catch some of our newer folks up to speed on what the board has done with respect to civilian complaints over the past 4 years. It's been a lot, But I thought that that might be a good starting point so we can think about where we want to go from here with this particular subcommittee and the work that you have yet or want to do in the future. So bear with me, I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to be working with several different applications, so I'm trying to make sure that I don't mess this up. Okay, so we're going to start with the PowerPoint. Can you all see that on your screen? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. I'm seeing some nods. All right, so what I wanted to get started with, like I said, is kind of go through some of the work that the board has done over the past 4 years, as this next report upcoming is going to be the 5th annual report. And so far, you all have done an incredible amount of work, but it is helpful to know where you're at. So in the 2018 annual report, which was the first report for RIPA, it included information that analyzed the civilian complaint data that is submitted by agencies to DOJ. It also included survey responses from 114 law enforcement agencies throughout California that kind of gave us a baseline understanding of what civilian complaint policies and procedures exist within the agencies across the state. The report also included some recommendations and best practices for agencies on accessibility to file civilian complaints, translation and interpretation services, as well as best practice and recommendations on complaint procedures and investigations. So that was kind of a high level understanding of what is in the 2018 report. So in 2019, the board, okay, it moved. The board included an analysis of the 2017 civilian complaint data that is submitted by law enforcement to DOJ, and it discussed recommendations and best practices on these particular things. How agencies' civilian complaint policies should contain some particular basic principles, and those are detailed in the report. I didn't include all of that information here, or we would be here for a while. It included information on what that the policies for the civilian complaint procedure or process should be accessible and well communicated to the community. It also recommended that civilian complaint policy should contain details on the intake process, the filing of a civilian complaint, and a tracking process for civilian complaints. It also encouraged that civilian complaint policies include basic details on the investigation process that the agency will take, so that the community member understands where their complaint is, what will happen after that complaint is submitted to the agency. So in 2020, the board report included analysis of the 2018 civilian complaint data, and also included an analysis of the civilian complaint data that had been submitted to DOJ from 1981 to 2018, and included specific analyses for agencies that had submitted that data and were reporting for RIPA. The report also included best practices with regards to the civilian complaint form, which detailed several pieces that should be on a civilian complaint form. It also included recommendations on how to process civilian complaints, and it reviewed the Wave 1 agency's civilian complaint forms. And for our newer folks on the board, Wave 1, you'll hear us say Wave 1, Wave 2, Wave 3 very often, and that refers to the group of agencies that are reporting. So RIPA required the 8 largest agencies to begin reporting in 2018. That was Wave 1. The next group, I can't remember the exact number, is Wave 2, and we are currently, Wave 3 is on board, and this is sort of the most recent wave that we're on. There are only 4 waves, so we will be done with that next year. The 2020 report also included a discussion about barriers to data collection itself. So you've been hearing me say that the reports have included analyses of civilian complaint data. That data by state law has been required by agencies since 1981. And in the 2020 report, the board detailed some issues that they saw with the collection of that data and had recommendations for what they could change in order to make that more accessible and transparent to members of the community. So some of those issues included a discussion of the lack of statewide uniformity with regard to civilian complaint procedure and process, and how folks label civilian complaints, lack of uniformity in the processing of the complaints, and lack of accessibility or lack of knowledge with respect to an agency's civilian complaint process, and the barrier to submitting civilian complaints with respect to California Penal Code 148.6, which is basically language that can potentially chill the submission of civilian complaints by requiring that folks read an admonition and sign it, and therefore potentially not be able to submit something that is, say, anonymous or by a third party. And so that was kind of a discussion that was had in the 2020 report. Now, in 2021, the board's report included an analysis of the 2019 civilian complaint data. It reviewed the Wave 2 civilian complaint forms, and it also included some survey responses from 25 of 26 agencies, so that included Wave 1 and Wave 2 and Wave 3, with respect to whether or not they had particular civilian complaint policies or procedures, and whether or not they had some kind of civilian oversight, such as a civilian oversight board or commission, something of that nature. It also included a foundational discussion on early intervention systems, and that discussion included sort of a background on how it's used, the required supervisory engagement, common indicators that agencies may use to flag officers with an early intervention system. It included a discussion of US DOJ recommendations and some examples of an early intervention system policy from Arizona and Washington. So you've heard me say this a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that all of us on the here and of course the new board members understand sort of where the law is with respect to civilian complaints and why some of the work that the board has done is what has been focused on. So in state law, the primary sort of statute that governs civilian complaints is Penal Code 832.5, actually it might be 7, 0.5. So that Penal Code requires that agencies have a civilian complaint investigation procedure, but it doesn't detail what kind of procedure, how that should work, any particular key items that should be included in that type of procedure. It really leaves each agency with the discretion to decide how to do civilian complaint investigations, including how to label a civilian complaint when it is submitted to their agency. The other requirements that kind of come from this law, the main legal requirements are that they must establish a investigation procedure, and that procedure must be in a written form and available to the public. And any complaints that are submitted that fall into this category must be retained for a minimum of 5 years. Now, the state law itself includes a definition of unfounded or exonerated specifically for sort of the outcome of an investigation, but again, it doesn't describe how to come to that outcome, what kind of investigation process to do, or any other types of dispositions for that matter. The agency also has a discretion by law to save the complaints either in an officer's general personnel file or a separate file, unless that complaint is specifically found to be frivolous. Complaints that are found to be frivolous can be kept in a separate file, not in the officer's personnel file. Now, with respect to civilian complaint data, state law, as I mentioned earlier, has required agencies to submit civilian complaint data to DOJ since 1981. And it requires a submission of several statistics, but the ones specific to civilian complaints include any complaint that is received by the law enforcement agency under Penal Code 832.5, complaints that allege criminal conduct that either fall into a felony or misdemeanor category, and citizen complaints that allege racial and identity profiling disaggregated by that specific type of race or identity alleged. It also requires the submission of data regarding the disposition for each of those types of complaints. And the law itself, which is Penal Code 130.12, has 4 disposition options that the agencies must submit to DOJ. those dispositions are exonerated, sustained, not sustained, and I'm forgetting the fourth one right now. But those 4 dispositions are also not something that are required for each agency to have, but it's required for agencies to submit the data with those dispositions. So you can see kind of where some of these sort of conflict or aren't as smooth as they should be, so to speak. All right, so because some of this stuff is not as smooth as it should be by law, and as I mentioned, the board or the subcommittee has discussed some of the barriers to civilian complaint data collection. The board did specifically ask for recommendations. Now, in the 2020 report, the board brought back this discussion again and mentioned that because one of the goals of RIPA is to have more granular data about civilian complaints, there are sort of changes that should be made to the collection of that data and potentially to the processes that agencies take. So the board, as you can see on the screen, they mentioned that because one of the goals of RIPA was to require agencies to provide more granular data regarding civilian complaints that allege racial or identity profiling, in order to better analyze these complaints, it is crucial that agencies use similar methods to define and track civilian complaints. So the board brought that discussion back up with respect to the processes and the definitions of, say, civilian complaint itself as a word and the process by which they're investigated. But in 2018, the board actually recommended that the reporting itself be changed. So the law did not change as to what needs to be reported, but the way that the data was submitted, so how it was disaggregated, is what changed. So the board asked DOJ, or asked generally in the report, a recommendation to be made about altering the way that data is submitted. And the Department of Justice took that recommendation and changed their civilian complaint data collection form. Now that change included separating out complaints that are reported and reported and resolved in the same year versus those that are reported and then resolved in a separate year. Because before, those were all together and made it a little bit complicated to understand, well, if an agency has X number of complaints, but they only resolved this X number, what does that mean and what is going on? So disaggregating it by year helps not only the board, but also members of the community better understand this data that is being collected. It also required that the complaints be disaggregated by those that are made in a local detention center versus complaints that are made outside of a local detention center. And it also changed, as I mentioned, that the agencies have to submit civilian complaints that allege criminal conduct, specifically misdemeanors or felonies. And so what the recommendation from the board is to change that collection to disaggregate it by offense level for each disposition and connected to the profiling if that is the case. All right, so sorry, I have to show another screen. We'll get back to the definition of a civilian complaint in a minute, but I wanted to go now to the review of civilian complaint forms, because I've mentioned that, but folks who are new may not have an understanding of what that means. So let me now show you what we have done, and this was in the meeting materials. Can you see a PDF that has sort of a table or matrix, if you will, on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned, there's been a review of the Wave 1 and Wave 2 agencies' civilian complaint form. And what that review has looked at is these topics. So is the form itself accessible online? Can members of the public submit a civilian complaint online? Do the agencies offer multiple methods of submission? So be that in person, online, through the phone, any kind of way, we sort of look at that. We also look at whether or not the form is available in multiple languages and a few other things. So can a third party submit a complaint? Does the complaint form itself provide a narrative field section for the complainant to explain or describe the situation. We also look at whether or not language from Penal Code 148.6 is included on the civilian complaint form or not. And we look at whether or not the details about the civilian complaint investigation process is attached to the form for the member of the community to know what that process is when they're submitting their submitting their complaint. So as you can see, this here is wave 2. So this was last year's. We have each agency listed, and we either give them a check mark or an X based on sort of back and forth with the subcommittee. So we will present sort of what we found and ask, okay, this is what we have found. Would you give that a check mark or an X based on what we have shared with you? And you'll see here we have, for example, OS and PV. That's because we've designated differentiations for online submissions versus a paper version, because agencies sometimes, as you can see, have different practices for these varying methods. And so this review was sort of based on best practices that the subcommittee included in the report. And what we want to know from you all going forward this year is whether or not you want to do this matrix again for wave 3, and for you all to start thinking sort of ahead in the future, because next year, wave 4 will include 400 agencies, which will be far too many to do a matrix like this for. It could be the whole report, I'm sure. So we want to think about where we want to go from here. But for this year itself, wave 3 is including these agencies. And sorry, like I said, I was going to be going back and forth between the PowerPoint and other. Okay, can you see that on your screen? The list of agencies? Okay, perfect.
Wait, we just lost it.
You said you lost it? Can you still see it?
Now we can see it. Now we can.
Okay, great. So as you can see, wave 3 on the left-hand side includes 11 agencies. But there's also something that we've had come up sort of in the interim is a sort of wave 3.5 or early adopters. These 4 agencies, there's a consortium, so there's more in that 4, but these 4 agencies are from wave 4, and they decided to start collecting their data early. So we would like to know from you all, do you want to do this matrix again this year? And if we do the matrix this year, do you want to include both the wave 3 and wave 3.5 in your review? And to give you sort of some thought about whether or not to include both, I have asked this same question of the policy subcommittee who reviews the bias-free policing policies in a similar matrix, if they want to include wave 3 and wave 3.5. And they said, you know, as long as it's not too much more work for you all to do, they'd like to include both. So just something for you all to think about. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of discrepancies between the definition of complaint, the process of investigating them. And this is, again, something that the board and this particular subcommittee has brought up time and time again. Now, as you can see in the 2020 report, the board basically mentioned that by reviewing these policies of wave 1 or wave 2, it reveals that the term itself, civilian complaint, is not defined either in agencies' policies or in state law. And so that affects not only whether or not an agency is going to investigate the complaint, but also ultimately whether or not it will be reported to DOJ. And so when we're thinking about what we want to do moving forward after these 400 agencies come on, one of the things that last year's subcommittee ended the year on was wanting to find a definition to recommend in the report for the term civilian complaint. And in the 2020 board report, 2 potential definitions or potential definitions to work from were included in the report. You can see on the screen we have one here from the Los Angeles County Grand Jury and one from the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. They're fairly different from each other, but you all can see that the grand jury recommends or has noted a particular definition of civilian complaint could be one that basically is an allegation by a person that a sworn officer or custodial employee of an agency or the agency itself has behaved inappropriately as defined by the person making the allegation, and the person making the allegation is the complainant. What NACOL suggests is types of complaints that should be investigated include allegations that, if proven true, would represent misconduct under the police department's policies and procedures. So you can see they're kind of different from each other, but do give us something sort of to work on. So last year's subcommittee, or at the end of last year, this subcommittee decided that something they would like to include in this upcoming report is a definition of civilian complaint. And so we would love to get your feedback on either these two suggestions, maybe things that you want to toy with, language you would suggest yourself, so that we can kind of come up with something that you all are comfortable with recommending to the legislature, for example. And I say the legislature because in the past, and Board Member Swing may remember this, the board wrote a letter to the California legislature about Penal Code 148.6, and again, that's the language that can have a chilling effect on members of the community submitting civilian complaints. So, if the board wanted, or the subcommittee wanted to provide a civilian complaint definition and ultimately not only just include that in the report, but also write another letter to the legislature recommending a law change to include a definition of civilian complaint, that's also something that we could think about doing for this year's report. And a letter like that could also include other suggestions that you all have had over the years, which includes requiring that agencies accept anonymous civilian complaints or third-party complaints, recommending that agencies have a tracking system and allow members of the community to track their complaint, because right now, again, that is at the discretion for every agency. You could also include something about how you all have talked about language access. So other law requires agencies to ensure that they are translating and providing meaningful access to members of the community who make up a particular percentage of the community, but that isn't necessarily tied and connected at this moment in law to civilian complaint access. So potentially that could be also something you all may be interested in encouraging by recommendation or by way of a letter to the legislature. Something else that you all may want to think about as far as where to go from here, what to do next. And again, this is something that you all have sort of brought up in the past 4 years about work that you wanted to do for this particular subcommittee, is to think about civilian complaint procedure. So right now, a lot of the work of the board has focused on reviewing the civilian complaint form itself, but not necessarily reviewing agency procedure, and process about investigations of civilian complaints. And so that's a potential way, something that you all may want to do in the future, or do some kind of research and ultimate recommendation about standard investigation procedures that you all believe will provide the best access and opportunity for folks in the community with regard to civilian complaints, and encourage law enforcement to follow those. You could also potentially ask agencies across the state, maybe as a sample of, a large agency that works in a huge metropolitan city in California, or some small area in California, and somewhere in the middle, to sort of get an idea of what different types of investigation procedures are currently out there that you all can pull from to maybe think about what would be the standard investigation procedures that you all would want to recommend to ensure that access is happening, and of course specifically related to the proper disposition of complaints related to racial and identity profiling. And something else you all may want to think of potentially reviewing that has come up in last year's sort of subcommittee meetings as well is reviewing civilian participation in any kind of investigation process or oversight with respect to civilian complaints. So the board last year included information in the report about agencies that do have some kind of civilian review board. And as you can see on the screen here, these are the agencies that responded to our survey that let us know that they do have some kind of civilian review board. We don't know much more about what those civilian review boards do, how they function, if there's policies or procedures, or what at all their role is. All we know right now is that they do have one, And so potentially something that you all may want to consider is looking into that, what that looks like, to ultimately make, again, recommendations on how you all think that civilian review boards or oversight groups should be incorporated or included or collaborate with law enforcement with respect to civilian complaints. Now, as I mentioned, last year's report included a foundational discussion on early intervention systems. And it was really sort of understanding what the field is like, how long this has been around, how they really work. It was really just, let's get a basic understanding of what early intervention systems are. And the subcommittee at the end of last year really wanted to focus on, for this coming year, looking at the effectiveness of those systems. They sound great, but are they doing what they are intended to do? And if they aren't, or they are, what are the pieces that make it work and what are the pieces that don't make it work? And in addition to that, the subcommittee wanted to know how does civilian complaints get included, or are they taken into consideration when it comes to early intervention systems, and how do those really work? So in sort of some of the research that we have done since last year about early intervention systems, we came upon this group that, I say group because they actually are no longer at University of Chicago. They work with Carnegie Mellon now, but the Center for Data Science and Public Policy, they began research and implementation of a sort of updated early intervention system with the White House initiative back in 2015 under President Obama for his Task Force on 21st Century Policing. So I have a little video here to give you sort of an introduction on what that is, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what we found, and we can decide sort of in the next agenda item where you all want to go, what interests you, and all of that. So hopefully you all will be able to hear this well, and I am going to pull up just another window. Can you all see the YouTube page? Yes. Okay, sorry, I can't always see people, so if people are nodding, I can't always see that. Okay, thank you so much.
Data science for social good.
Yes. All right. So hopefully you'll be able to hear. If not, please let me know and I will readjust. For some reason it's not playing. Okay, there's no sound yet, just so you know. We're not in bad territory.
Led to dire and even deadly conflict. Also undermine conflict. Early interventions by providing training.
Okay, it looks like folks can't hear, so I'm going to just try one thing very quickly to make it easier for folks. Okay, let's see if this helps.
Report.
I think it does. It sounds louder already.
Over the past few years, there have been several high-profile adverse interactions between the public and police. These have led to dire and even deadly consequences. They have also undermined confidence in the police, making the jobs of upstanding officers much more difficult. Early interventions can help with this. By providing training, counseling, and other forms of support, departments can get ahead of the curve by reducing the risk of overuse of use of force, and by dealing with chronic problems of rudeness with people, and try to prevent those things from blooming into more deadly problems. Unfortunately, police departments use these early intervention systems, which are guided by thresholds. In this particular case, the threshold is 3 complaints in 180 days. These very simple thresholds are very inaccurate, and they eliminate a lot of important context, such as where an officer works. And that's why, in 2015, we partnered with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. We wanted to build the first data-driven early intervention system for police officers. We collected a lot of data. We made a site visit. We spoke to a lot of supervisors, and we even did ride-alongs. And of course, we built a lot of models. And based on the feedback and the results that we got, we decided to do it again. Only this time we added the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. And that summer we were able to demonstrate that data science can solve these problems across multiple departments. And yet, despite all of that work, there is a lot to be done. And so for the past 2 years, the Center for Data Science and Public Policy has continued the work, taking what the fellows had done in those 2 summers, taking it a step further, tweaking the models, and even helping to develop policies and web interfaces with the partners for effective interventions. You may be wondering how well these things work. So in a large department, you're going to have officers who have adverse incidents. Ideally, the early intervention system is going to identify those officers and those officers only for interventions. Those interventions are going to be very effective, and then those officers can go back into the force with a reduced risk. That's not how it works in practice, however. And so these threshold systems can flag as many as 2/3 of the officers in the department and yet miss many of the officers who go on to have adverse incidents. In this particular case, this department would have been better off by flipping a coin. You compare that to what we've done, and we are able to identify more high-risk officers while making fewer mistakes, giving the departments the opportunity to use their very limited resources for effective interventions. This is one of the displays for one of the departments and what the supervisors see when an officer is flagged. We are giving much more context than what they had before. This includes a risk history, as well as internal affairs cases from the past, arrests and dispatches. This gives the supervisor much more information to make an informed decision about an effective intervention for that particular officer. And we're very proud to announce that this work has received the 2018 Research Award from the Arnold Foundation and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And recently, we licensed our software to Benchmark Analytics, a local company that provides software to police departments. They're taking a step further in providing the customer support and other tools that is going to scale this work across the country. And we look forward to that happening so that we can reduce the number of adverse incidents in the future. Thank you.
Okay, great. So you all saw from the video sort of a basic understanding of what work they have done and continue to do, hopefully in the future. But essentially what they looked at, and this was in my research about figuring out whether or not sort of the EIS system that we discussed as a framework in last year's report is effective in flagging officers and preventing what they term adverse incidents from happening. It's all good and well if we can flag folks before things happen again, right? We don't want that to happen. So essentially, as you heard them say, most EIS systems that agencies use tend to be threshold systems that, as I mentioned, sort of provide for a minimum count of a particular thing within a set number of days. There's another type of system called an outlier system, which really flags officers when there is a high risk shown that that officer that officer is a high risk because of an unusual number compared to the rest of the officers. And those are sort of the two basic ways or the two types of EIS systems that most law enforcement agencies use if they use an EIS system. Now, according to, I guess, Carnegie Mellon's now Center, they basically find that these two systems are not as accurate at identifying officers who are at risk for adverse actions because they tend to either over-identify individuals or under-identify individuals. And really the main sort of issues that they find with these particular systems is that generally an officer can also find a way to kind of fudge the system a bit in the sense that you can very clearly understand if I get a set number of use of force incidents in a particular set of days, I'm going to get flagged for a intervention. And so there are ways by documentation or something like that that potentially an individual could get out of line and not be noticed. And so the way that their system works, they use something called machine learning, which is totally out of my realm of understanding, but it's some sort of data science mechanism that really takes a breadth of information from an agency to then rank officers. And it takes information from not only to where the officers patrol, how long they've been on the force, other types of demographics, but also the training that they've had, maybe their payroll or other actions that may detail the way that they police, the number of stops or arrests, whether they have been involved in internal affairs investigations or civilian complaints. It takes all of that information to then sort of give a ranking between officers of who is likely to have an adverse action in a particular set of time. So they encourage agencies to do something, say, in the year before. In December of 2020, for example, you have this comprehensive data about all the officers in your agency, and from that data with this particular system, you will be able to know who needs that intervention most recently. So you can know in January 2020 which officers you should be focusing on, and then as the months go on, you can again reassess who is at most need. And what that does, it allows for officers, or for the agencies, I'm sorry, to really focus their resources and work on those people who need the intervention earlier on rather than when it's too late. And so essentially, their data-driven system currently, from what I could see, is obviously used with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and also with the Nashville Police Department. I don't know how widespread it is, but I do know that they did do a pilot program sort of with the San Francisco Police Department here in California, and they have also done one with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, but I have not been able to find information on the Sheriff's Department's pilot program. For San Francisco, they essentially took what San Francisco uses, their early intervention system, and compared what their early intervention system flagged to what their system flagged. And essentially, they used 8 years of data of officers from San Francisco Police Department to create their data-driven EIS. And what they learned is that the center's system was actually 2 times more efficient than what the system was that San Francisco was already using at the time. This was back in 2018 that this was done. But as you can see, there are various types of early intervention systems, and this is kind of one of the newer versions, or I'd say an upgraded model, because EIS has been around for quite some time. And so this is just something that I found that I thought you all might find to be interesting and potentially want to look more into, potentially get maybe a presentation, or even, presentation being from the folks who created this system or from San Francisco to get an understanding of, how did they feel about working with them? What has that done for their potential work with your officers, to sort of get a better understanding and ask questions about, okay, how specifically are civilian complaints used, for example. And I think that we're almost at our 30 minutes of presentation, so I'm going to stop there for a second and check in with Allison before I have just maybe 5 more minutes.
We can keep going and then do introductions afterwards. I just wanted to announce that we do have 2 board members who have joined us. Lawanda Hawkins and Cha Vang have both joined. So we officially had a quorum just for purposes of the minutes at 2:20. But I think we can finish the presentation, then go back to introductions and approval of the minutes, and then have the discussion about what the subcommittee wishes to do.
Okay. Thank you, Allison. All right, so the last little piece that I wanted to sort of talk with you all about is with respect to EIS systems, we have done surveys for other things or asked questions of agencies for other things with respect to their policies and procedures, whether or not they have civilian review boards, but we have not yet sort of delved into asking California law enforcement about their early intervention systems. And so another sort of option that you all may want to consider about what to do is to kind of get a better understanding again of what is the field like right now. Are folks using a particular vendor? Do they have an EIS system? What kind of EIS system are they using? Maybe what factors or indicators do they use to flag officers? And specifically with respect to this subcommittee, maybe asking how agencies do use civilian complaints or commendations when they're thinking about how to input data into these systems to ensure that they are trying to prevent adverse actions from happening. So I know I threw a lot at you all in the past 30 minutes, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody was well prepared and versed in what the subcommittee has done and to make an informed decision about sort of where they want to go. And so I will leave you here with that. We will welcome Cha, and then we will vote on the minutes, and you all can discuss what you want to do.
Thank you, Dominique, for excellent presentation and information. We really appreciate it. Before we do get into the discussion, I would love to take the opportunity for Lawanda and Cha to introduce yourselves to everybody. Lawanda, do you want to go first? Oh, you're muted, Lawanda. We can't hear you. Still muted. I'm wondering if we can unmute you here. I'm not sure we can.
Lawanda, and I'm a board member. And
Did
you
it
hear
skip
me?
out? I only heard your name and then it skipped out for me. It seems like others
Okay,
have
hi,
the
my
same.
name is Lawanda. I'm a RIPA board member. I've been on the board for now maybe about 2 years. And I'm also the founder of an organization called Justice for Murdered Children. We're located here in Southern California.
Cha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, my internet's a little unstable, but good afternoon, everyone. Cha Vang, and I am currently a deputy director for AAPI Specific Empowerment. We're a statewide organization that advances campaigns and policies for working class Asian Americans across the state. Formerly, I was executive director for Hmong Innovating Politics and a grassroots organization in Sacramento and Fresno, working to build political power for Hmong and disenfranchised communities in both the two counties and through the Central Valley. I'm a longtime Sacramento resident and also a refugee. So I'm super excited to be a part of this board and seeing how I can also contribute and work with each one of you. Yeah, so this is actually my first meeting. First, I haven't been to the full meeting yet, so this is actually a first meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Cha. We're thrilled to have you on the board as well, and glad you were able to join us today. Since we do have a quorum now, is there, oh, and sorry, and just for Lawanda and Cha's sake, because you were not on before, because Angela Sierra has resigned from the board, we now no longer have a co-chair for this subcommittee. And so we weren't able to notice that election of co-chairs for this subcommittee meeting in time, but we will have the election at the next subcommittee meeting. So if you are interested in nominating anyone to be a co-chair or nominating yourself to be a co-chair, please, you can email us and let us know, and we will hold that election and notice that for the next subcommittee meeting. But now that we do have a quorum, we'll go to the agenda item number 2 that we skipped over, approval of October 1st, 2020 subcommittee minutes. Is there, would like to make a motion for approval? And I should specify that
I
you
motion.
do not. Okay, great. Thank you, Lawanda. And is there a second?
I'll second.
Great, thank you, Pastor Kennedy. All in, well, I guess we should do a roll call. We can do a group roll call since I'm able to hear all of you. So all in favor of approving the minutes? I see Lawanda, yes. Pastor Kennedy, yes.
Aye.
Swing.
And I need to abstain because I wasn't part of that meeting.
You actually, you may abstain if you wish, but you, per the board, you are actually able to vote to approve the minutes, even if you were not present at the meeting. So,
All right, then I approve.
great, thank you, Andrea and Cha.
Yes, I was also going to abstain, but if that's the case, then I'll approve.
Great. Wonderful. So we have, and so no abstentions and no nays. So the motion carries, and the meeting minutes from October 2020 are approved, and we will get those up on the website for everyone to be able to view them. Wonderful. So that brings us to a discussion of the proposed subcommittee report contents. Dominique gave you all the history of what the subcommittee has done, the matrix that Dominique presented, whether you all would like to continue with that matrix for Wave 3, knowing that we won't be able to do that for Wave 4, whether you want to think about definition for civilian complaints, whether you would like to pursue EIS, whether you're interested in a presentation at the next subcommittee meeting. So we have about 45 minutes for the discussion, since we're running a few minutes behind, and we want to make sure we allow time for public comment. But I will leave it all up to you, and thank you, Dominique is here as well to answer questions.
I wanted to ask Dominique a question. I think I heard your answer. How does a citizen know that their complaint was investigated and adjudicated?
That was going to depend by the agency. Some agencies do provide a letter to the complainant about whether or not their complaint was investigated. Most of the time, from what I've seen in my experience, is that there's not necessarily details on what the outcome of that investigation is, but that will really depend on each agency, because there's no requirement by law to provide a complainant with any information about what happens once they submit their complaint.
I would think that would be something we might want to take up and maybe formalize and give a uniform way for various departments to respond to complainants.
We can certainly.
I'm with you on that, Pastor, because people feel as though their voices are not being heard.
I'm scanning the penal code right now, because I know what our practice is. I know the practices in other agencies, and that's definitely the practice. And I thought it was actually codified in the penal code, so I'm looking for that now.
Yeah, I think that speaks to, visibility and transparency in the process. So it would be good to know. It would be good to know if it does exist in the penal code, and if not, consider it as part of a whole bucket of things that were raised in the presentation.
I think we also have. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I have another question, separate, unrelated.
Maybe we can connect this question with the existing topic. And then we would have to identify what needs to be in that report, how much information needs to be in that report. If it's an ongoing investigation, it may be a little problematic to release too much information that might compromise the investigation. But we need to at least define what needs to be reported bare minimum.
And when you say reported, you mean back to the person who made the complaint?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, with a timeline and a setting of expectations.
That would help with a lot of complaints we hear on the streets if people would have a respond. They would feel as though their voices are being heard, even if it's not the response they want. At least they know someone did hear did look at the complaint. Because right now we're filing complaints and we don't know what's happening to them.
And I was going to ask Board Member Lawanda, I know that you have extensive experience with filing complaints in Los Angeles City, maybe the county as well. My understanding from my experience, and so I'm asking yours, and maybe you can share it with the rest of the board, is are you given a way to track your complaint, say a number or a phone number that you can call to check on your complaint? Do you get anything like that in your experience?
No, I have not seen that at all. I've seen the people complaining at the police commissioner meetings and no number is given to address their issue. So it would be nice if there was a tracking number that you could go back, push in that number, and it will tell you that someone did look into it and what was the end result. That would help all law enforcement agencies because that's been transparent. They're showing it's up front.
Dominique, it's Nancy. Maybe, I don't know if it'd be helpful, and I don't know if you happen to have it, but 832.5, and you might just want to take a look at that and highlight the mandatory requirements. As Chief Swing pointed out, it seems unfathomable that that's not codified in the law to respond to the individual complainant. But I know you had touched on this in your PowerPoint, but maybe you just want to explain what the requirement is under that provision.
And I have it pulled up, Dominique, if you don't.
I'm waiting for it to load. If you have it already, that'd be great. This
Sure. So I don't have 832.5 pulled up, but I do have the RIPA requirement. So maybe if you, under RIPA at least, all agencies are required to report on civilian complaints alleging criminal conduct of either a felony or misdemeanor, racial identity profiling. And the statistics provide for each category of complaint, the number of complaints within each category and the disposition. So that includes ones that were sustained, exonerated, not sustained, unfounded. The reports are available to the public and disaggregated for each law enforcement agency. And the law enforcement agencies also include statistics which are comparable with national uniform statistics, and the RIPA board shall analyze the statistics and incorporate the analysis of its complaints. And so that's in terms of what's required under RIPA. Dominique, I don't know if you have 832.5 pulled up yet.
Yeah, it is loaded. So 832.5, just generally speaking, what it's supposed to cover is citizen complaints against personnel, investigation, retention and maintenance of records, removal of complaints, and access to records. This requires that agencies establish a procedure to investigate the complaints and make that written description available to the public. So that's generally providing the process of what that investigation looks like. It also requires that the complaints be retained for a period of 5 years. And like I mentioned during the PowerPoint, they can be retained either in the personnel file or in a separate file at the discretion of the agency. Unless it is a complaint that is found to be frivolous, that will be kept in a separate file, not the general personnel file of an officer. Let's see here. This is the frivolous section. And it also discusses, that management can't use the complaints found to be frivolous for punitive or promotional purposes unless provided by a particular code. And, it says that they can identify an officer who needs additional training or counseling based on that complaint. The final piece of this particular piece of the law just defines what a general personnel file is, what unfounded means, and exonerated, what those two sort of dispositions mean. But that code itself does not dictate sort of what goes out to the person who filed the complaint. It's more of an internal procedure.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
832.7 subsection F1. The department or agency shall provide written notification to the complaining party of the disposition of the complaint within 30 days of the disposition. So 832.7 sub F1 speaks to that. I also know that in here it also speaks to sending a copy of the complaint back to the complaining party as an acknowledgement of receipt. I don't do that readily, but I know that it addresses the disposition issues that were raised earlier.
Do you know where it says to send a complaint back?
I mean the acknowledgement or of
Yes,
the
acknowledgement.
you mean the acknowledgement of receipt of the complaint or the acknowledgement of the disposition?
No, the receipt of the complaint.
I'll continue to scour my sources and look for that and let you
Okay.
know.
Sounds good. Okay, so we have the requirement then that an agency provide written notification of the disposition within 30 days of that disposition back to the complainant. And that basically the law says that it shouldn't be conclusive or binding, that sort of information. But there isn't anything here about necessarily tracking or the particular process by which to track, like giving a tracking number to the complainant, for example. They may get a phone number, someone to call at the agency to check in, but the law doesn't sort of detail more than just providing the disposition to the complainant within 30 days of that disposition.
Well, I'd have to check that to verify that, because it would seem certainly as a well-known practice that if an agency receives a complaint, they have a method to track that complaint to ensure that it's appropriately investigated and adjudicated in a timely manner. So I'd have to scour the. I know I'm reading our policy, and our policy prescribes each of those steps you outlined, and other agencies I'm familiar with follow that same practice. So if it's codified, I'm not sure, but definitely is a practice.
Yeah, and I definitely don't doubt that it could be a practice. Agencies have a lot of similar practices, and that's also why I recommended that potentially in understanding more about the procedure and process that agencies take, it could be good to get a presentation from sort of a sample of agencies across California to get an idea of what everybody is doing before you recommend sort of changes or in conjunction with recommending things.
It also says in 832.7 that a complainant shall be provided with a copy of his or her statement at the time it is filed with the department. Also codified in 832.7.
Okay.
So friends, for purposes of today, our mission is to identify topics that we would like to see covered in the report. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so it sounds like this issue that Pastor Kennedy raised is one that may warrant inclusion, and it sounds like we just need a better understanding of what's already in law, and maybe an issue of putting that law into practice, or maybe a gap in what's needed in law. I wanted to ask a separate question, which is that I know that the RIPA board did send a letter to the legislature with recommendations for changes to Penal Code 148.6, and I'm wondering if the legislature ever acted on that. And that was to clean up 148.6 because of the chilling effect it had on complaints.
Have not.
Yeah, I was like,
Sure.
we've not heard anything about any follow-up on that from the legislature.
So I can just let you know that I think Dr. Weber had tried to bring it up before the COVID pandemic hit, and then it was put on hold. And my understanding is that she was going to bring it up again before she was appointed Secretary of State. And so we are not sure if there is a member of the legislature that is going to be able to take it up this term.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And it might also be helpful to think about, we may have missed the moment for this legislative season or session, but if we are going to, if we do identify other gaps, maybe we can send another letter to underscore the need for that previously recommended change, and also any other changes, cleanup to the statutes that would help clarify and strengthen the complaint process.
Would that mean that you would also sort of want to include a definition of civilian complaint?
Well, you listed a whole host of things, all of which I would love for the board to include in its report, including a definition of a civilian complaint. You asked about whether to include a matrix, an ongoing matrix, understanding that once we bring on Wave 4 agencies, we're going to have a lot more data for the complaint process. And I'll just weigh in here now and say I would vote for including that data, just because there are a lot of places, a lot of counties, a lot of cities, a lot of law enforcement agencies. We don't want to underreport information just because somebody's in a smaller community. And then looking at the civilian complaint procedure itself, I think digging into that is a good area that you suggested, Dominique, to better understand. And that, I guess, gets at this issue that Pastor Kennedy brought up about how the law enforcement agencies are handling the complaints. And the early intervention systems is something that is worth exploring for sure. So all of these buckets, everything you raised is worthy of deeper discussion.
Welcome back, Board Member Guerrero. I see you're picking up right where you left off. A lot of good insights and information and work to be done.
I smell a co-chair brewing.
She's raising her hand, not me.
No, I appreciate being on this board, and I'm really excited to be here with Pastor Kennedy and Chaveng, Lawanda and David, all of you. This is I wasn't sure who was going to be on this committee, but this is an all-star committee, so I'm really excited. I think we can get some good work done. I'm not necessarily throwing my hat in for co-chair here. I think we've got good candidates, like, say, for example, Pastor Kennedy, who I think would be fantastic.
Oh, okay. My silence is not consent. Thank you. Thank you. Perhaps with the early intervention system, the reporting. Well, let me ask this first, and I think I may have some insight. But Chief, do you being with the chiefs, have you heard of just an enormous amount of complaints? It was just overwhelming for various departments, and they're just having a hard time processing that complaints.
I'm not sure I understand the question. If the question is, have I heard about an overwhelming number of complaints?
Right, citizen complaints. Have you noticed, chiefs, just bringing that up? We just have an enormous amount of complaints. We can't process them.
I have not. No, I have not.
Oh, and tidying up the complaint system, this could also be incorporated into the early intervention system. If a certain department is getting an enormous amount of complaints, at least there should be some kind of flag saying, "Hey, mate, let's check this out. What's going on there?"
You mean an enormous number of complaints for a particular officer or the agency as a whole, or
The,
both?
the agency. I think it's already in place for an officer, but I'm not sure it's in place for an agency.
Yeah, I think there could be potentially two different ways to look at an issue of a high number of complaints. For example, one might say that that's a red flag and we need to explore that and see what's happening, why the agency has so many complaints. And I think there are others who may say that an agency that has a high number of complaints has a high number of trust, because the community trusts the police department enough to make a complaint knowing that it's going to be looked into and evaluated and investigated. So I think it can be looked at through either lens, candidly.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I've sat in forums where the chief said, "Call my office."
Right. Right. And we know that sometimes calls for service are an indicator of a trusted department. If they have a high number of calls for service, it's because the community trusts the department to respond to address their concerns, as opposed to, no, I'm just not going to call because I'm not going to do anything. So there's
Right.
I don't have the background to be able to say which one's right. I'm just sharing their different perspectives.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think prior committees, prior iterations of this committee looked at that specific issue and identified the obstacles to complaints as an area of major concern for the board to look at, right? And removing those obstacles, because I think you're right, that David, that we want to know what people are concerned about.
And the board has, in the civilian complaint section, detailed some of those varying perspectives, as you mentioned, Board Member Swing, about potentially, it's hard to compare when you have the data for individual agencies. It's hard to compare between agencies because that really will depend on whether or not folks are trusting of the department, or is it an obstacle within particular departments to submit complaints. So that is also, or has been discussed, and I think has generally been reiterated with every year when we look at the complaint data, just so folks take what they see with a grain of salt and individually, and not compare across agencies, given the lack of uniformity.
I would think that if we find that Chief Swing's statement is proven true, that our report could also highlight that, where departments that have a high level of trust, somehow we can highlight that. Not sure how we do that, but something to think about.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's it'd be a great focus to focus on what are agencies doing well, and where are the success stories in what we're reporting out, so that we can highlight those success stories.
So I suppose that leads then, do you all have an interest in maybe having a presentation by, I don't know, community members or a particular agency related to civilian complaint procedures or EIS, given these two sort of big topic areas that you're all thinking about?
I think
It seems EIS is a really relevant and contemporary topic. I know that there was the presentation that you just shared with one provider, and there are probably a couple of other primary providers in that marketplace. So I don't know if we need a vendor demo per se, but maybe agencies that are using some of those different vendors and how they're using it and how it's been helpful for them. Ideally, different size agencies, not just the large, wave one, but how are smaller agencies using it? Because that's the majority of our agencies in California. And what are we seeing through their experiences?
Very good.
Okay, and as far as the matrix, I know Board Member Guerrero, you said you are interested in providing as much information as we can and not sort of shine away because it's a smaller agency. I take that to mean that yes, you want to do the Wave 3 matrix and potentially, or also include the Wave 3.5 agencies, which is some of the smaller ones from Wave 4 that started earlier. Is that what I heard? And do others on the subcommittee agree with that?
That's what you heard.
I'm new matrix. They usually help, so so if we can do it, that'll be great, I suppose.
Okay. So normally we'll work on it and come back to the subcommittee, and you'll see it and be able to provide your feedback on how to sort of measure the agencies.
Okay.
Yeah. I think Wave 3 is probably doable. I think Wave 4 might get a little bit burdensome, and I'm cognizant of the investment of staff time required in that, and is that the right investment of time for a larger project? So, because there's a lot of, I think a lot of other priorities that are also important to the board.
Yes, and just so you all know too, and I share the policies sort of decision because I work with them with their matrix as well. In thinking about what to do for next year when they're not going to do a matrix for 400 agencies, they're thinking about looking at Lexipol policies because they understand that many smaller agencies are probably likely to use some of these more form policies because it's more resource intensive to make your own. They're thinking about doing some kind of review of that and the use of that. So just as an idea for you all in the future if that's what you want to look towards. But you can keep those wheels turning for the future meetings about what we want to do after or for next year.
Well, one thought for you all as staff is to automate the survey so that the generation of data is just straightforward computation, and it may not be something that we would publish in a written report, but like other things in the report, we leave to an digital addendum. But I would hate for, I guess we should assess whether the information is meaningful or not. And, but I think that it's just really helpful for local law enforcement agencies at the smaller departments as well as the community advocates to have all the same data that the Wave 1 agencies have provided. I think that helps everyone if it's meaningful and if it can be, serve in some interest. I mean, Lexipol is important because, they provide 90% of the law enforcement agencies their policies, but not all, right? And there's certainly some concerns about agencies not even being able to afford the updates on Lexipol. So I know of, for example, local agencies here who, pay for it like every 5 years. So it's like, how helpful is that? I don't know.
I see.
Yeah, I suspect that our Wave 4 agencies is probably higher than 90. My guess is it's bumping right up against all. Maybe not all, certainly though, very close to it, since it's usually larger agencies that have their own policy manuals. So I just I think that by providing it in the Wave 1 through 3 agencies, I think we're giving advocates an opportunity and an idea of what to ask for. If it's not the Wave 4 agencies, then our advocates will know, hey, what about agency so-and-so? And I think it open that door through a Public Records Act request or a conversation with their local agency.
Fair enough. If there was a way to understand, and maybe we just talked to Lexipol about this, but if there was a way to understand how current these small agencies are with their Lexipol policies. Because if they're only buying, the update every X years, then they're not really bringing in all of the best practices.
Or are they staying up to date on current relevant case law and so forth as it pertains to their policy and
All of that, yeah,
right, sure.
yeah.
Okay, I have one more question about something that I offered and just want to know. So yes, we're thinking about having presentations from a varied representation of agencies across the state about sort of EIS and their experience with different types of EIS programs. Would it be then, would you all be interested in asking the wave 1 through 3s, I suppose, because that's who we sort of are in communication with more regularly, about whether or not they are using an EIS system, which one they're using, how they either do or don't include civilian complaints or commendations, and maybe some of the thresholds or ways that they flag officers. Is that something that you are interested in getting information on to report out in the report, in addition to getting a presentation, or do you want to focus on having sort of a presentation and then going from there based on what we hear, what you're looking to put in the report?
I think we could have a presentation that might help inform that conversation. Again, I would ask that we try to expand it beyond the wave 1 through 3. That's about maybe 60 agencies, maybe closer to 40 or fewer out of the, there's 329 or so municipal police agencies. So you take your special districts, probably close to 400 or so law enforcement agencies in California. Many of them are wave 4, and so I think it would be especially relevant for the majority of agencies in California if we had some wave 4 representation and how they use EIS systems.
Okay, I will definitely keep that in mind.
And if you incorporate several of the questions you mentioned, that may save us time. So prepping them to answer those questions would be helpful.
Definitely, I can do that.
Dominique,
Yes.
you gave a couple definitions for citizens complaint. Are there several others out there that you looked at? You picked 2. Why did you pick those 2?
So those 2 were included in the 2020 RIPA report. I didn't personally include those, and I wish I could tell you how we landed on those 2, but I think those were 2 of the samples that ultimately got put into the report. There are sort of more out there, are ones that we can look at to sort of create something for you all to then provide feedback on, maybe something that brings different things together, or if you all have suggestions on what kind of language you would like to see in a definition of civilian complaint, we would love to hear that from you all as well. But that's something that maybe we could bring to you all at the next subcommittee meeting, taking the ones that I showed on the screen and then looking for other options and any feedback that you all may have on ideal definitions.
Yeah, we might take maybe 4 of them, then wordsmith one that we like. Just build on someone else's shoulders instead of digging up ground again. Okay.
Is there any other feedback from anyone on what you all want to see going forward?
Can you remind me, did we include a model or best practices around civil complaint procedure in the prior reports?
There have been snippets of that. So there are broad recommendations or best practices about investigation procedures and say complaint forms, but then what we've done, or what you all have done in the past, is give these broad recommendations and then provide, say, like a model language for example, for agencies to adopt. And that's kind of what we did for the form itself. There's model language that
Right.
you all encourage folks to do, but we don't have, say, model
Procedures.
or investigation practices. Yeah, we just have best recommendations. And so, if that would be helpful for me to bring to you all to review and then think about what you want to see moving forward when we think about the cleanup that you all are thinking about writing to the legislature on, I can do that.
Yeah, it would be great, I think, to understand what a model civil complaint procedure would look like. And if we haven't done that before, and, drawing from either, big law enforcement agencies in California or professional experts like from the Police Executive Review Forum or Vera Institute or 21st Century Policing recommendations, one of those, that would be really, really great to see.
Okay.
I know this is Allison. I know that idea has been raised before, and I think we may be able to, the subcommittee may be able to come up with a way to include model language or model categories. The main reason that we've not done a model form is because of 148.6. I'm mixing up the penal code. Because that has not yet been resolved. I think the general understanding was that once that hopefully gets resolved by the legislature, then we would know what could be included in the form and whether that, because I think there was some hesitation, at least from the subcommittee in the past, about having a model form and whether or not that section would have to be included. But I think if you all have suggestions about, I think there are probably ways that if you all have suggestions about, thinking of categories that should be included or model language, we might be able to put something like that together without having it be an official form. But I know that it has been discussed in the past that the eventual next step would be a form once the issue around 148.6 was resolved.
When does Bonta come into office?
As soon as he's approved. So at this point, I think the legislature has 90 days. Is that correct?
Since the announcement.
Yeah.
The legislature has 90 days to do what?
To approve, to vote him in, basically approve his nomination.
Got it.
So he will be here if approved. He will be here within a few days fewer than 90 days at this point, since I was nominated last week. But it's sometime in the next 3 months or so if he is approved. If the nomination is approved.
And what is the process normally for the Department of Justice to engage with the legislature? Like, given that the board previously sent this letter, is there a role to play for the Department of Justice to engage with the legislative office on that question, or is that left outside of DOJ and outside of the board to advocates? And I only ask because I know there are some bills that this could potentially be an add-on to. If this is a something we need to get resolved sooner rather than later, maybe there is a way. Maybe it's through DOJ, maybe it's outside of DOJ. I just want to make sure I understand what your protocols are around that question.
So, Andrea, those are really great questions. As you know, we are in a transition, as you alluded to. I don't think it's going. My understanding is that Governor Newsom has said he wants the appointment to be quick. And I think the legislature has committed to do that quickly. So we're not anticipating the full 90 days. I think we're looking more at like 2 to 3 weeks. We always welcome if board members have channels to, to move forward board approved, full board approved policy, because right now we can't do it. As I mentioned, we were discussing those, though that the policy that the board recommended was something that was supported by Attorney General Becerra, and so to that extent, the board's recommendation was in line with what the Attorney General wanted. I have no reason to believe that nominee Bonta will not also feel that way, seeing that he was a co-sponsor author of RIPA. And so I'm assuming that he's going to be very engaged, but we are in a limbo. We have an acting Attorney General now. And so, big policy decisions that aren't critical are going to need to be deferred to nominee Bonta.
Yeah, got it. So maybe I can follow up with you afterwards, and I guess I would just ask David if the I want to be cognizant of the Bagley-Keene Act, and so I want to ask this question now because I don't think I can ask it later. Is the Police Officers Association, the Police Chiefs Association, are they in a position to move this forward?
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of the association because our board hasn't had a conversation about this specifically. What I can tell you is that, and tell my colleagues on the board and DOJ staff, is that this is an important conversation that I think is deserving of a larger legislative process as it relates to legislation in California, and not one that is that should be hurried or rushed through or added to a gut and amend or used by some other vehicle to try and accomplish this expeditiously. I think is deserving of a thoughtful process that aligns with the law and involves relevant stakeholders, both community and our profession.
Nice to see you again, David. Nice
Welcome
to see
back.
you again.
And I am smiling. I can't see you, but I am smiling.
Oh, well, I'm smiling too. Okay.
But Andrea, I don't know that, I don't think that the legislative moment is lost. I think we're still early enough in the legislative process that this could move forward. So I've not given up hope.
Okay. I'll follow up with you later.
I need to, do we have other voting items to accomplish on our call today? If not, I need to step away for a 4 o'clock meeting that I need to spend some time getting ready for.
Not have any more voting items. We can have maybe 2 to 3 more minutes of discussion, and then I want to open it up to public comment. But thank you, Chief Swing.
Okay, then I'm going to step away. So thank you all. Pleasure to be here, and I'll see you all in the next call.
Bye.
If there are any final thoughts from the subcommittee that you wish to share about prioritization for this next year's report?
The only comment I have is as we're doing things, we want to try to simplify and make things relevant. So I think we can do that. We're putting things to the legislature or whoever we're submitting our reports to, just trying to make them simple and relevant.
Excellent goal. We'll keep that in mind as I prepare for you all and your next meeting.
Thank you.
Not hearing any other comments, I'd like to open it up for public comment before our final discussion of next steps. So is there anyone who is on the phone or on the video conference from Northern California who wishes to make public comment? Okay. Anyone from Central California who wishes to make a public comment? How about anyone from Southern California? Is there anyone who wishes to make a public comment? Okay, before we close the public comment period, is there anyone on the line who wishes to make public comment? All right, well, thank you all. Now for a discussion of next steps. Dominique, do you want to summarize what you will be working on, it sounds like, for the next subcommittee meeting?
Yes, I will do my best, and if I don't have something correct, please let me know, board members. So I think primarily for the next subcommittee meeting, we will work on getting presentations from a representative sample, for lack of a better term, of agencies from throughout California, maybe one from wave 1, 2, 3, and 4, to sort of discuss with you all EIS, and particularly those questions that I raised about what they use, how they use it. And then as an overarching sort of what you all are looking to include in in this year's report, is really looking at how can we shore up the civilian complaint process and investigation process and what is required by law, and both including in the report or also writing a letter to the legislature about those things related to investigation processes and related to what or how much a civilian or a complainant, receives in return after submitting their complaint. So, is there kind of a tracking mechanism? What do they get in return? How much information do they get? As well as reviewing the wave 3 and 3.5's civilian complaint form for the annual report. And I would say it's kind of all together about civilian complaint processes and procedures is bringing up for you all what best practices and recommendations the board has made specific to civilian complaint procedures for you all to discuss, to think about what you want to put forward about a standard investigation process that I think is also tied to sort of what cleanup of the penal code or other government codes there might be related to civilian complaints investigation processes. Does that sound about right?
Yes, we're going to mess around with a definition.
Yes. Oh, thank you. And specifically, yes, I have mess around with sort of bring potentially different definitions to you. You said about maybe 4 or a potential definition that we've sort of wordsmithed for you all to look at as well.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. I do have that down though. Don't worry, I didn't forget. I just forgot to say it.
No problem. I have a question. I don't know if we want to tackle this year, but maybe next year. The civilian review boards. And I know that's a hot topic. And so maybe next year we'll look at that.
We'll say that the Policies and Accountability Subcommittee is beginning its sort of research and looking into civilian oversight boards.
Okay.
So it is an area that the State and Local Policies and Accountability Subcommittee is starting to explore. So at the beginning stages, but it is something that they have identified as something they'd like to dig into a little bit more, especially, in light of the accountability aspect that's really important.
We'll read their report.
Okay, is there anything else from anyone for next steps?
And so it will be at our next committee meeting. Is that right, that we will decide a chair for this?
Yes.
Okay.
So we will notice.
A chair or a co-chair? Do we have a chair?
We don't have a chair, so we can decide on a chair or two co-chairs.
Either. Okay. All right.
I mean,
Well,
there's always a preference for two if possible, because if one person cannot attend, there is still a chair. But we would like at least one chair. But two co-chairs is always great.
okay. So I want to underscore my fondness of Pastor Kennedy as a chair, because I don't know you, Pastor Kennedy, but I think you have the right skills and demeanor to lead us. So I'm gonna throw my hat in now, early for you.
Andrea, you're going to get in so much trouble.
Welcome back, Andrea, and